The Duke had trained himself for 15 years, never to feel surprise. Arthur Whitaker, Duke of Ravenshollow, had built his life around control. Control over his words, his emotions, and even his memories. The frightened orphan boy he once was had long been buried beneath wealth, power, and a reputation for cold perfection. In the polished halls of Whitaker House, no one would ever guess that the most powerful duke in the county had once slept on a thin straw mattress in a crowded workhouse. Yet that December morning in 1892, everything changed with the quiet gleam of a small silver ring. Arthur descended the grand marble staircase of his Mayfair mansion with his usual measured steps. His cravat was perfectly tied, his dark coat spotless, and his expression calm and distant. The staff moved around him silently like shadows, trained to stay out of the Duke's way. At 32, Arthur Whitaker had everything society admired. Tall and commanding, with dark hair and sharp blue eyes, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew his power. Dukes consulted him. Politicians respected him. Society hostesses competed for his attention. But none of it mattered to him. Inside, Arthur still felt like a stranger in his own life. "Good morning, Your Grace," said Harrison, his loyal butler, waiting at the bottom of the stairs. "Good morning, Harrison. The morning letters are in your study, sir, and Lady Petton has sent another invitation for her Christmas ball." Arthur sighed softly. "Decline it," he said calmly, as always. "Very good, Your Grace." Harrison hesitated before adding another detail. "The new servants have arrived for inspection. Cook asked that you approve the additional kitchen staff before the Christmas party." Arthur paused with one hand on the banister. Normally, he left such matters to the housekeeper, but the upcoming holiday gathering would host some of the most influential people in England. Every detail had to be perfect. "Very well," Arthur said at last. "Have them assembled in the servants' hall." Minutes later, Arthur entered the long stone hall where the new staff waited in a neat line. Their faces were stiff with nervousness. A dozen hopeful workers hoping to secure a place in one of England's grandest houses. Arthur looked over them with practiced indifference. A tall footman, 2 housemaids, a stable boy. Then his gaze stopped. At the end of the line stood a young woman in a plain black dress and white apron. Her head was bowed respectfully beneath a servant's cap. Nothing about her appearance was unusual, except the ring. Arthur felt his breath catch. On her finger was a simple silver band. The metal was worn with age, but the faint shape of an engraved rose could still be seen. The room suddenly felt smaller. His heart began to pound. Because he knew that ring. He had bought it 16 years ago from a traveling peddler outside a cold stone workhouse. He had spent every penny he had earned doing odd chores just to afford it. And he had given it to a girl named Lily. The memories came rushing back with painful clarity. 2 hungry children sitting together on a narrow bed. A frightened girl with bright green eyes. A promise whispered in the darkness. "Promise me, Arthur," she had said softly. "When you grow up and become rich like you always say, you won't forget me." Arthur swallowed hard as the memory continued. "I promise, Lily," the boy he once was had replied. "One day I will come back for you. I will marry you, and we will never be hungry again." "Your Grace?" Harrison said carefully. Arthur realized he had been staring at the servant girl far too long. The woman slowly lifted her head, and their eyes met. Green eyes, the same green eyes he had dreamed about for years. "What is your name?" Arthur asked, his voice rough. "Lily Carter, Your Grace." The sound of her voice sent a shock through him. Older now, softer, but unmistakable. "Lily," Arthur repeated quietly. She flinched slightly. Yes, Your Grace. Arthur's hands trembled faintly behind his back. He forced himself to remain calm. Where were you employed previously? Several households in Yorkshire, Your Grace, she answered carefully. Most recently with the Thornton family. Yorkshire, the same county where the old workhouse had stood. Arthur felt the past pressing in around him. Harrison shifted uneasily beside him. Arthur suddenly realized every servant in the room was watching. He cleared his throat. Harrison, he said quickly. See that the new staff are settled. I will review their assignments later. Without another word, Arthur turned and walked out of the hall. But he was no longer the calm Duke who had entered. Inside his study, Arthur closed the door and leaned heavily against it. Lily, he whispered. She was alive. For years he had searched for her. Letters sent. Inquiries made. But the workhouse had closed, and she had disappeared. Eventually, he had forced himself to believe she was gone forever. Yet here she was, in his house, wearing the ring he had given her. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. Harrison stepped inside. Your Grace, the new maid Carter has been assigned to the scullery as planned. Arthur nodded slowly. That will be fine. Harrison studied him carefully. Forgive me, sir, but you seem unsettled. I am fine, Arthur said quickly. But he wasn't, because the walls he had spent 15 years building around his heart were beginning to crack. And the girl who held the key to his past had just walked back into his life. For 3 days, Arthur avoided her, but avoiding Lily Carter inside his own house proved nearly impossible. He caught glimpses of her in the corridors, carrying buckets, scrubbing floors, always quiet, always invisible. Yet every time he saw her, his heart pounded like a frightened boy again. Finally, on the 4th morning, he gave up the fight. Harrison, Arthur said during breakfast, send the maid Carter to my study. The butler blinked in surprise. Yes, Your Grace. An hour later, a soft knock sounded at the door. Arthur's pulse quickened. Enter. Lily stepped inside. She immediately curtsied, her eyes fixed on the floor. You wish to see me, Your Grace? Arthur looked at her carefully. The years had changed her. Hard work had left faint lines around her eyes. Her hands showed the marks of labor, but her quiet strength was the same. Sit down, Arthur said. Her head lifted in shock. Your Grace, I could not possibly. Sit down, Lily. She hesitated before carefully sitting at the edge of a chair. Arthur stepped closer. You recognized me, he said. Yes, she replied softly. Why didn't you contact me? Lily gave a small, sad smile. Because you became a duke, she said, and I was a workhouse girl. Your new life had no place for someone like me. Arthur's chest tightened. That is not true. You were a boy when you made that promise, Lily said gently. We were children saying things we did not understand. Arthur stepped closer. I never forgot. Lily looked at him sadly. But the world did. Arthur felt the distance between them more sharply than ever. A duke and a servant. Yet when he looked into her green eyes, none of that seemed to matter. Meet me tonight, he said suddenly. Your Grace, in the conservatory, after the house is asleep. She hesitated. One conversation, she said quietly. Arthur nodded. One conversation. But as Lily left the room, Arthur knew something deep inside him had already changed. Because the promise he had made as a starving boy was no longer a memory. It had become his future. The conservatory was silent, except for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant ticking of the house clock. Moonlight poured through the tall glass walls, covering the exotic plants in soft silver light. The scent of jasmine filled the warm air, making the room feel far away from the cold world outside. Arthur Whitaker stood beside a stone bench, waiting. For a man known across England for his calm authority, his heart was racing like a nervous boy again. 16 years. 16 years since he had last seen Lily. 16 years since he had made a promise that had shaped his entire life. The quiet creak of the door made him turn. Lily stepped into the conservatory. She had changed out of her servant's uniform. Instead, she wore a simple gray dress that made her look younger somehow, closer to the girl he remembered. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. "Hello, Arthur," she said softly. Hearing his name from her lips again felt strange and familiar at the same time. "Hello, Lily." They sat on the bench, surrounded by blooming flowers. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Arthur broke the silence. "Tell me what happened to you after I left the workhouse." Lily looked down at the silver ring on her finger and slowly turned it. "Everything changed after you left," she began quietly. "The other children treated me differently. Some thought you would come back for them too. Others were jealous because you had chosen me." Arthur felt a wave of guilt. "I tried to find you," he said quickly. "After I inherited the title, I searched everywhere, but the workhouse had closed." "I know," Lily said gently. "People talked about you for months. The boy who used to share his bread had become a duke." Arthur stared at the floor. "I should have come sooner." "You couldn't have," she said. "You were just a boy, learning how to survive in a new world." She paused before continuing. "I stayed in the workhouse until I was 18. Then they turned me out with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and your ring." Arthur clenched his hands. "What did you do?" "I found work in a tavern in York, washing dishes, scrubbing floors. The work was hard, but it was better than sleeping on the streets." Her voice remained calm, but Arthur could hear the years of hardship behind it. "Later, I found work with a merchant family in Leeds," she continued. "The Thorntons. They needed a maid who could read and write." "That sounds better." "It was," Lily said. "Mrs. Thornton was fair. I even thought I might save enough money to open a small shop someday." Arthur smiled faintly. "That sounds like you." But it didn't last. Arthur's smile faded. "Why not?" "Mr. Thornton's son returned from university," she said quietly. Arthur felt anger rise instantly. "He took an interest in me." "And when you refused him?" "He accused me of stealing," Lily said calmly. "His parents believed him. I was dismissed without pay or references." Arthur stood up suddenly and paced across the room. "The coward!" "Arthur," Lily said softly. He turned back toward her. "How could they do that to you?" Lily shrugged gently. "Because I was a servant, and he was their son." Arthur stopped pacing. The simple truth of her words felt like a heavy weight. He had spent years surrounded by the very society that allowed such injustice. "After that, I moved from house to house," Lily continued, "until I heard Whitaker House needed staff for the Christmas season." Arthur sat beside her again. "So fate brought you here?" "Or coincidence," she replied. Arthur looked at her carefully. "Lily," he said quietly, "what do you want from life?" She looked surprised by the question. "I want peace," she said after a moment. "A small home, honest work, a place where I belong." Arthur felt something tighten in his chest. "You belong here." Lily shook her head gently. "No, Arthur. I belong downstairs with the other servants." "That's not true." "But it is," she said firmly. Arthur leaned closer. "I made you a promise." "You were 16 years old," she replied softly. And I meant every word. Lily looked at him with a mixture of sadness and affection. You're not that boy anymore, and you're not the same girl either, Arthur said. For a moment they sat quietly, the moonlight shining across their faces. Arthur, Lily said slowly, do you love me? The question surprised him. I never stopped thinking about you. That wasn't my question. Arthur hesitated. Did he love the woman before him, or the memory of the girl he once knew? I don't know, he admitted honestly, but I know no other woman has ever mattered to me. Lily studied him for a long moment. Then perhaps we should find out. Arthur's heart lifted. How? Slowly, she said. We talk. We learn who we are now. Arthur nodded. Yes, but there must be rules, she added quickly. What kind of rules? During the day, I remain a servant. No special treatment. Arthur frowned but agreed. And if at any point you decide this is a mistake, she continued, you must tell me honestly. I promise. And you must promise something too, Arthur added. What? That you won't run away because you are afraid. Lily smiled faintly. I promise. They talked for hours that night, about their childhood, about the loneliness of their separate lives. For the first time in years, Arthur felt like himself again. But their fragile happiness did not remain secret for long. A week later, the great Christmas house party began. Whitaker House filled with powerful guests from across England. Among them was Lady Petton, the famous society matchmaker. And with her came a young woman named Lady Charlotte Fairfax. Lady Charlotte was beautiful, elegant, and everything society believed a duke should marry. Arthur knew exactly why she had been brought. During dinner, Lady Petton praised Lady Charlotte endlessly. She plays the pianoforte beautifully, the older woman said proudly. And she speaks 4 languages. Arthur smiled politely, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Downstairs, in the kitchens, where Lily was working. That night, Arthur slipped into the scullery. He found Lily washing dishes, her hands deep in soapy water. Arthur, she whispered in shock, you shouldn't be here. I needed to see you. You have guests waiting upstairs. I don't care about them. Lily looked tired. Lady Charlotte is perfect for you, she said quietly. I don't want Lady Charlotte. You say that now. I mean it. Lily turned back to the sink. You are a duke, she said softly. Your life belongs to society. My life belongs to me. Before she could answer, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Arthur stepped back into the shadows. When the other maid left, Lily turned to him again. This can't continue, she whispered. Yes, it can. No, she said sadly. You deserve someone from your world. I only want you. Lily shook her head. You must let me go. Arthur opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, chaos erupted the next morning. Arthur was in his study when Harrison burst inside. Your Grace, the butler said breathlessly. There has been an incident. Arthur stood immediately. What happened? One of the maids has been accused of theft. Arthur's heart began to race. Which maid? Harrison swallowed. Lily Carter. Arthur felt the world stop. What? Lady Charlotte's diamond bracelet has been found in her room. Arthur's voice turned cold. That is impossible. Lady Petton has already sent for the magistrate. Arthur moved toward the door. Then we will settle this before he arrives. Because Arthur Whitaker knew one thing with absolute certainty. Lily Carter would never steal, and someone in his house had just made a very dangerous mistake. Arthur Whitaker moved through Whitaker House like a storm. Servants stepped aside quickly, as the Duke strode down the corridor toward the servants' hall. His expression was colder than anyone had ever seen it before. Inside the hall, a crowd had gathered. Whispers filled the room as Arthur entered. Lily stood near the center, pale but calm. Her hands were folded tightly in front of her. Across from her stood Lady Petton, her face full of sharp triumph. "There you are, Arthur," Lady Petton said loudly. "This matter must be handled immediately. The girl stole Lady Charlotte's diamond bracelet." Arthur's eyes moved to Lily. She looked frightened, but there was something else in her expression, too. Trust. "Is that true?" Arthur asked quietly. Lily lifted her chin. "I did not take the bracelet, Your Grace." Lady Petton scoffed loudly. "The bracelet was found in her room, beneath her mattress. What more proof is needed?" Arthur stepped closer. "Did anyone see her take it?" "Of course not," Lady Petton said sharply. "Thieves rarely perform their crimes in front of witnesses." Arthur remained silent for a moment. Then he spoke calmly. "I do not believe she stole it." The room went silent. Lady Petton stared at him in disbelief. "Arthur, this is absurd. The evidence is clear." "Evidence can be planted." Lily looked at him in surprise. Lady Petton's voice grew sharper. "Why are you defending this servant so passionately?" Arthur felt every eye in the room watching him. This was the moment. He could stay silent. He could protect his reputation. Or he could protect Lily. Arthur stepped forward and stood beside her. "Because," he said clearly, "Miss Carter is not just a servant." The room held its breath. "She is the woman I intend to marry." Gasps filled the hall. Lady Petton laughed loudly. "Marry? Arthur, you cannot be serious." "I am completely serious." Lily turned toward him in shock. "Arthur!" But Arthur continued. "We have known each other for many years. Our engagement was private, but circumstances have forced me to reveal it sooner." Lady Petton's face flushed with anger. "This is madness. You cannot marry a scullery maid." "I can," Arthur replied calmly, "and I will." At that moment, Lady Charlotte entered the room. She had heard everything. Her face was pale. "Your Grace," she said quietly. "Is this true?" Arthur looked at her gently. "I am sorry, Lady Charlotte. You deserve a husband who loves you fully. I am not that man." Tears filled her eyes. "I understand." Lady Petton slammed her cane against the floor. "This will destroy your reputation, Arthur." Arthur did not move. "I would rather lose society than lose the woman I love." Just then, the door opened again. "The magistrate has arrived," Harrison announced. Magistrate Thornfield stepped into the hall, a tall, stern man with sharp eyes. "I understand there has been an accusation of theft." Lady Petton stepped forward immediately. "Yes, the bracelet was found in this girl's room." The magistrate examined the bracelet carefully. Then he turned to Lily. "Did you take this?" "No, sir." The magistrate nodded thoughtfully. Then he looked at the bracelet again. "Interesting." Arthur leaned forward. "What is it?" "This bracelet shows no signs of rough handling," Thornfield said slowly. "If a scullery maid had hidden it beneath a mattress, there would likely be scratches." Lady Petton's confidence faltered slightly. "Perhaps she wore gloves." "Perhaps," the magistrate said calmly. He then began questioning the staff. Every kitchen worker confirmed Lily had been washing dishes all morning. She had never left the scullery. Then Thornfield asked another question. "Who discovered the bracelet?" "I did," Lady Petton said. "And you searched the servants' room personally?" "Yes." One of the maids suddenly spoke nervously. "I saw Lady Petton in the servant corridor earlier this morning." The room fell silent. Lady Petton turned sharply. That is ridiculous. Before anyone could respond, another voice came from the doorway. I'm afraid it isn't. Lady Charlotte stepped forward. Her face was pale but determined. Magistrate Thornfield, I must tell the truth. Lady Petton's voice rose. Charlotte, you will say nothing. But Lady Charlotte ignored her. My godmother asked to borrow my bracelet this morning. She said she wished to show it to someone. Arthur's eyes widened. Later, I realized what she had done. Lady Charlotte continued softly. She planted it in Miss Carter's room. Lady Petton's face turned white. You foolish girl! The magistrate closed the jewelry box calmly. Lady Petton, you are under arrest for false accusation and fraud. The room erupted in shocked whispers. You cannot arrest me, she shouted. I am a lady of society. You are also a criminal, Thornfield replied. Moments later, Lady Petton was escorted away. Silence slowly returned to the hall. Arthur turned to Lily. Her eyes were filled with tears. It's over, she whispered. Arthur smiled softly. Yes. Later that evening, they stood together in the quiet study. You shouldn't have done that, Lily said gently. What? Announce our engagement in front of everyone. Arthur stepped closer. I meant every word. But society will reject you. Arthur shrugged. Then society can leave. Lily studied his face carefully. Arthur, are you certain? He took her hands. I love you. Not the memory of you. Not the promise. You. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. 3 months later, the small church on Arthur's estate was filled with flowers. The wedding was simple. Only a few loyal friends attended. Many members of high society had refused the invitation. But Arthur did not care. As Lily walked down the aisle in her ivory dress, Arthur felt more certain than he had ever felt about anything in his life. The vicar smiled warmly. Do you, Arthur Whitaker, take Lily Carter to be your lawful wife? I do. And do you, Lily Carter, take Arthur Whitaker to be your husband? I do. You may kiss the bride. Arthur kissed her gently. The promise made by 2 hungry children had finally come true. Years later, Whitaker House was filled with laughter. Children ran through the gardens. Elizabeth, James, and little Thomas. Arthur watched Lily rocking their youngest child beside the window. Papa, Elizabeth said, climbing into his lap. Tell us the story again. What story? The story about the ring. Arthur smiled. Once there were 2 children in a very sad place called a workhouse, he began. A boy named Arthur and a girl named Lily. They were best friends. One day the boy had to leave. Before he left, he gave the girl a ring. And what did he promise? Elizabeth asked. Arthur looked at Lily across the room. He promised he would come back one day and marry her. And did he? James asked sleepily. Arthur smiled. Yes. Because some promises are too important to break. And in Whitaker House, the small silver ring with the engraved rose remained a treasured symbol of a promise that had survived time, hardship, and the judgments of the world. A promise made by 2 children, and kept by 2 hearts that chose love over everything else.